Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCullum, and I'm here today at Morphy's with a Danish M50 Madsen. We normally call it Madsen, but the Danes pronounce it Madsen submachine gun. This is the quintessential post-World War II Danish submachine gun. Now, during the war, Madsen, or DISA, the Danish Industrial Syndicate, manufactured actually license-produced versions of the Finnish Suomi, and I actually have a video on one of the Danish Suomis if you're interested in it. But once World War II is over, they want to manufacture something of their own. They want to manufacture something that's a lot cheaper to make than the Suomi, which was really sort of a classic first-generation style submachine gun with a lot of complicated milled parts and fine fit and finish. Well, the Danes look at what's going on around the world. We got Sten guns with the British, we've got M3 grease guns with the Americans, the Germans had all sorts of crude stamped crap at the end of the war, and the Danes, I guess, go, well, wait, look, if crude stamped crap is what people want, and that's what the market is, well, we can make some crude stamped crap. Let's come up with something that's even simpler than a Sten gun in some ways. And the result was the Danish, the Madsen M46. Note that this is a 50. The first one they did was the 1946 pattern. And while I say crude stamped crap, it is intended to be quick, cheap, and simple to manufacture. They actually worked really well, which led to them being really remarkably popular worldwide. They have this really interesting, clever clamshell design, which we'll take a look at in just a moment. The 1946 pattern did actually pretty well. They demonstrated it, they sold them to the Danish police, which, you know, for the one big Danish gun company, that's kind of a gimme. But then they also managed to make a couple of foreign contract sales for them. El Salvador, Paraguay, Thailand purchased M46 Madsens. And then they continue working on the gun to make it a little bit better. They improved the charging handle design. We'll talk about that when we look at this up close. And then in November 1950, they demonstrate the new Model 1950 Madsen submachine gun to a big public audience. They put 20,000 rounds through one of the guns in a recorded 2 hours and 17 minutes. The gun runs great, reliable for 20,000 rounds, no parts breakage, and that leads to a bunch more international export contract sales. So the Madsen turns out to be remarkably popular in Southeast Asia and Central America, and South America particularly. This is a gun that wasn't generally purchased by the Western Allies, what would become the NATO powers, and it wasn't purchased by like the Warsaw Pact communist-oriented countries. Both of those groups had their own small arms. Of course, the Western Allies were awash in Sten guns and grease guns and M1 Garands and Thompsons and, like, you name it, all the war material that the US and British are happily giving to everybody. They're re-equipping the French with American arms, and they're re-equipping all the Low Countries with American arms. Those guys don't need to go to Denmark to buy submachine guns. And similarly, the communist-aligned nations, well, they're all sort of getting on board the Soviet train, and they've got Papashas, they've got Sudayev submachine guns, and that sort of thing. What that leaves out is basically the unaligned nations, especially the ones outside of Central Europe. Central American countries, South American countries, the countries in Southeast Asia, the Vietnams, the Indonesias, the Malaysias, all of those countries who don't have a really close allegiance tie to either of these major world polarity centers. And so they're the ones who are buying sort of the third option guns, and Madsen is one of the big suppliers of submachine guns to those countries. So we'll see sales of the Madsen M50 to Guatemala, to El Salvador, to Venezuela, to Colombia, to Indonesia. We'll talk about their combat service, because there was actually some international combat service with the Madsen. But first, let's take a closer look at this cool clamshell system. On paper, the Madsen M50 is not a particularly exotic gun. It weighs 7 pounds, pretty typical for a stamped submachine gun. Chambered for 9mm parabellum, has a 32-round double stack single feed magazine. Again, pretty typical. We have an 8-inch barrel. Rate of fire is about 500 RPM, so a little bit on the slow side. Folding stock, like all of these features on paper sound pretty normal. Now, in terms of functionality, the stock folds to the right side of the gun, opens up like so. It is purely a friction fit. So we've got this spring that's just tightening, that's just pulling the stock arm up like that. And all you do to fold or unfold it is just give it kind of a push The rear sight is this little dinky aperture fixed onto the back of the gun. Front sight is a windage adjustable little blade on the front end of the gun. We have a manual safety here on the left side, F for fire, S for safe, which just disconnects the trigger mechanism. There is no semi-auto selector, it's safe or full auto. Markings are pretty minimal there. Madsen M50 9mm, got a serial number kind of ad hoc stamped on there. Made in Denmark was added when this gun was imported into the US. At the front here we have two levers. You already saw the mag release. This is a pull back to remove magazine release, so not super fast. And then the lever on the outside is a grip safety. So you'll see that in a moment when I take it apart. But if you want to fire the thing, you have to hold the grip safety down. Otherwise, it will catch the bolt halfway and not allow it to go all the way forward. This is there as obviously a safety mechanism, but what it means is that an unintentional pull of the trigger will not allow it to fire. And if you have the bolt closed and you manage to drop the gun on its buttstock hard enough to bounce the bolt open, it will catch on that grip safety and again, not fire unintentionally. The downside here is you can't actually like slowly drop the bolt because you need 3 hands in order to hold the safety down when you do it. So some people will see that as a real, like on a tactical level, this is definitely a downside, and you can certainly see people like, oh, I'm gonna tape this shut so I don't have to deal with it, which is, by the way, going to inhibit your access to the magazine release. But from a larger scale military perspective, where these guns are frankly going to be handled and trained with a lot more than they're going to be fired in anger, this probably saved a lot of people from stupid unintentional shootings. All right, but now on to disassembly. So I'm going to fold the stock because we're actually going to open it this direction. First step is remove the barrel nut here. This is threaded onto the receiver. And the receiver, you'll notice there's this seam going all the way up the receiver. This threaded end bit is also split in half right there. So I take off the barrel nut, lay the gun down, and just lift the whole thing up and open it up. If we look at the working bits here, I can now take the barrel and just lift it out of the gun. And I can then take the bolt and just lift it literally up out of the gun. The recoil spring is kind of long and compressed inside, but that's the bolt. That's it. There's a fixed firing pin in there, a hole for the recoil spring. We have an extractor. The charging handle is pinned in place right there. By the way, the easy way to identify an M46 Madsen is that the charging handle was sort of this C-clamp affair, low profile on top of the receiver, but it had to be removed before you could open the gun up like this. So going to the round charging handle just pinned into the bolt was a reasonable simplification for the M50 design. That's the bolt. Got recoil spring and guide rod. And that's it. That's all the parts in the gun. Now there is some extra stuff down here, which is kind of cool. Inside the grip, we have a magazine loader stored right in there, and then we also have a couple of spare parts. Now, previous owner here has wired these together so they don't make noise, but you have a replacement safety button for some reason. You have a replacement firing pin. So this is the firing pin. There's the actual firing pin. It does not reciprocate. It's not spring-loaded or anything. It's made as a separate component so that it can be hardened separately. Simplifies manufacture, basically, and it means it can be replaced if you ever need to. And then we also have a spare extractor right there, which I'm not going to try to take out, but that is a replacement for that guy right there. So all the parts you need, including, I think it's really cool to have the magazine loading tool also stored inside the gun. Just whoop, like that. Keeps it handy, keeps it from getting lost in theory. Now if we look at this clamshell, what they did was stamp the two sides of the receiver shell, and then they took all the main important bits that would normally be milled, and they still milled them, but they cut them in half as well. So we have two halves of a trunnion that are spot welded in place here. We've got our ejector that's right there, that's welded into place. On this side, we actually sort of have this additional trough that's fixed into the gun that holds all of the fire control bits. So the fire control system itself is extremely simple. It's just an open bolt firing sear. When I pull the trigger down, it pulls the sear down. That unlocks the bolt to go forward. And from here, you can get a better view of what that grip safety is. It's also really simple, just a claw. And when it's lifted up, that claw is going to lock into these recesses in the bolt. So there's the bolt just set into the receiver, and you can see when it goes forward, it hooks in there, and you actually, now you're totally locked up. You have to pull the bolt back to depress the grip safety to get it to go forward. When we go all the way back, right there, the sear is going to lock into the essentially the same position on the bolt. So when I pull the trigger, it's going to drop the sear right there, which under spring tension, the bolt then goes forward. And as long as you're holding the grip safety down, it goes all the way forward into the barrel, which just sits right there and fires. Now the barrel is not perfectly symmetrical. It does have a feed ramp here on the bottom, and it also has a pair of notches on either side. This one is for the front of the ejector. So when you close the gun up, this notch has to be in place right there, or else the gun won't successfully, you can't actually close it, because if it's out of position like that, the barrel doesn't fit in properly and you can't screw the barrel nut on. So that locks in there. And that's all you got. This groove in the trunnion is what holds the barrel from moving. That ejector tab puts it in the right orientation, and that's it. So to reassemble this, I'm just going to set the barrel in position, move the bolt all the way forward, reinstall our recoil spring. That just sits against the back of the receiver there. We'll put our spare parts back in there. And then just fold this back down. Line it all up. Barrel's locked in place. Barrel nut goes over the front, and tighten it down. And there you are, Madsen M50. I did mention there was some combat use of the M50, and that came from the Thais. There was a sale of Madsen M50s to Siam, now Thailand, and the Thai military was one of the countries that responded with a contingent of combat troops to the UN action in Korea, to the Korean War, and they took Madsen M50s with them. So by all accounts, they were reliable, they were good guns, decent. I suspect in the cold of Korea, they probably added a bit to that leather stock wrapping before sticking their faces down on that cold metal stock, but the guns appear to have done well. They were reliable, popular, and cost-effective, so much so that they actually remained in production until the 1980s, despite being a 1950 designed gun. So a gun that doesn't get a lot of respect, but it was a long-time standard for a lot of countries around the world with small militaries that didn't have their own domestic arms production. Now, here in the United States, in the 1950s and 60s, Interarms actually imported quite a few of these, and a lot of them ended up in the movie industry. So there are a lot of film studios that had these things lying around, and they tended to be, well, it's kind of the same way in that these are sold militarily to unaligned countries. Well, if you're making a movie and you use an MP40, that's a lot of people are going to recognize that as a German submachine gun. And if you use a Thompson, everyone recognizes that as an American submachine gun. So if you're doing a fantasy movie or a sci-fi movie and you want to have some sort of gun for either the good guys or the bad guys, but something that doesn't immediately break the audience's focus on sci-fi thing, well, you give them a gun that they're not going to recognize. And the Madsen was a popular choice for that. So you'll see this in, I believe, some Star Trek episodes, and a lot of movies, frankly, from the Cold War era, where, like, you need an exotic submachine gun? Boom, Madsen M50. They're cheap to get. The movie industry has a bunch of them, and that's in large part why we have a bunch of them here today. So should also point out there was a contract-made version of this in 45 ACP. That was the INA model 953 manufactured in Brazil. I have an article on that on ForgottenWeapons.com if you're interested in it. But yeah, the gun that doesn't get a whole lot of respect, but was in an awful lot of places doing an awful lot of things. So hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. Thanks to Morphes for giving me access to this one to show to you. Thanks for watching.